Once again, before Rinpoche will begin with the teaching, he likes to point out again one more time how important it is to give rise to the proper motivation. Whatever activity one goes about, be it learning the Dharma, practicing the Dharma, or whatever else it might be, the proper motivation, the proper attitude is of utmost importance. And this attitude should, of course, be that attitude which we know as the enlightened attitude, the attitude of bodhicitta, which allows us to strive to bring about welfare and benefit for all beings. If we go about it in such a way, if we bring about this motivation in the first place before embarking on any activity for that matter, then whatever positive merits will be accumulated through such activities will indeed remain with us until we ourselves have achieved the full awakening of Buddhahood for the sake of beings. Until we then achieve that Buddhahood for the sake of beings, these merits will not be exhausted, they will forever remain with ourselves. On the other hand, if we do not give rise to such a motivation, to such an attitude, then of course positive merits will be brought about through positive activities. However, they will immediately be exhausted and will not remain with us any longer. This is usually, the analogy that is usually used here is that of a banana tree or a water tree, as it is literally called in Tibetan, which bears fruit once and then rots immediately after. The very first line of our text goes Namo Mahakaronikaye, which means literally homage or prostration to the great compassionate one. Namo is that obeisance or homage. Maha means great. Karunika or karuna means compassion, and karunikaye is the greatly compassionate. This is a homage to the great compassionate one, who is also otherwise known as Avalokiteshvara or Chenresig. Why do we start out with paying homage to the great compassionate one, the one who personifies great compassion as such? The reason for this is that the development of love and compassion, loving kindness and compassion, is the very source, is the very basis for the achievement of Buddhahood. And accordingly, also the one whom we know as the Buddha, the one who appeared in this world in our age as the awakened one, he also, in a previous lifetime, first gave rise to loving kindness and compassion towards beings. Then, for a long time, he proceeded to accumulate immeasurable merits, again and again, on the basis of this kindness and compassion for beings, which then eventually culminated in his being able to demonstrate the achievement of Buddhahood for the sake of beings. Therefore, also we would be well advised, before we start out to listen to this teaching, before we start out with any activity of that sort, for that matter, to give rise to loving kindness and compassion towards being, because it is the very basis, it is the very source of that which will eventually culminate in the achievement of Buddha.
Sherab Chamber, your Mariana, and there are the Songi, Mondon, two Tongi Yanga, Maran Songa, and she Guna, the Tani Tachi Gawa, and then she took my hair so.
After the initial homage, the text begins with the words, "The Sutras, Tantras, and commentaries are vast and numerous, but it is difficult for those with little wisdom and short lives to fully understand them." So in this way, indeed, there is a vast corpus of teachings which is very generally subdivided into sutra teachings and the teachings of Tantra. The sutra teachings would be those which include all the words of the Buddha, including all the teachings on Vinaya, the sutras themselves, and the collection of teachings which is commonly known as Abhidhamma. Opposed to these sutra teachings, there are the so-called teachings of the Tantra class. These are being subdivided into the four classes of Tantras, which are the Kriya Tantra, the Charya Tantra, Yoga Tantra, and Anuttara Yoga Tantra, the highest or unsurpassed class of Tantra teachings. All of these Sutra and Tantra teachings are extremely numerous, extremely vast, and extremely profound, and there is an even larger number of commentaries and sub-commentaries on all of these teachings. To fully comprehend all of these teachings, to study all of them, and to understand their meaning completely, a single human lifetime is just too short. That is a fundamental problem that we all see ourselves faced with, that human life is just too short to study all of these subjects in their vastness and to comprehend all of these subjects. On top of that, we are not endowed with a lot of wisdom or with great intelligence, so learning all of these teachings and trying to understand them is also very difficult. So this is what is being expressed in these first two lines.
And Damso Chambu, he did make it and cut down, then he just want to keep by it. And then Damso down to conversation. Shooting that Chambu, he and Naranga, Yamso Marona, then depend on my Damso down and then conversation to keep by it.
Our text continues to say, even though you might know much, if you do not practice, it will be the same as dying of thirst at the shore of a vast lake. So even if it were possible for us to study the whole vastness of all of these teachings of sutras and tantras, commentaries, sub-commentaries, etc., and so forth, if we would not put these teachings into practice, then all of that study, all of that learning would be of no use whatsoever. It would be, as the analogy says here, as if we would sit or stand at the shore of a large lake, a large body of water, and we would die of thirst.
Tiga, Naran Dangja, Tiga, Dante, Naran Santola, Nyamso, Lane, Nome Yaboji Mazina, then Chever Council, Tamal Bottom, Kipa.
The next line in the text says, "It is even possible that you would become an ordinary corpse on a scholar's bed." This is a rather famous quote of Karma Chakras, in which he clearly means to say that even if we would have studied a lot, even if we would have been able to learn all of these vast teachings and become known as great scholars, if we do not apply the meaning of these teachings to our mind streams and bring about experience in that way, then when eventually the point of dying is upon us, well, then just an ordinary person's corpse will eventually be found on our beds. The great first German Contra Buddhatai has in one of his songs of realization expressed much the same by way of saying an ordinary corpse in the bed of a Dharma practitioner is the remains of a seemingly great man who has died in a very ordinary way. So the same thing is being expressed here. We might deem ourselves to be great practitioners, to have brought about peace and stability of mind, and we might even say of ourselves, for me there is no suffering, for me there is no negative circumstances, it's all the same to me, it's all empty in the Dharmakaya. We might actually believe that. But when death is eventually upon ourselves, then things look rather much different. And then in the end it will be proved that when just an ordinary corpse is being found after death has overtaken ourselves, that in this way we have just deceived ourselves by way of telling all sorts of tall tales about the quality of our practice. So in this way, Contra Buddhatai has expressed much the same as Karma Chakra is saying here in his text. And indeed, there are those who would by all means say of themselves that they are good, even great Mahamudra or Dzogchen practitioners, who would say of themselves that they have truly realized mind nature and that they rest within it, or at least they believe so. But then eventually a sickness will strike. They will be overcome by pain and sickness, and all of a sudden all of that talk is all but forgotten. They ask for the specialists to be brought in, they asked where the next clinic might be, where they might be brought, and cringing in fear, they listen to the words of the doctors, being fearful of whatever it might be that is being diagnosed, and all of their great Mahamudra or Dzogchen practice or whatever it might be, all of a sudden is out of the window. dear. Such things might happen. There was that Tibetan Lama who said of himself that he was a great Tummo practitioner who had really brought about inner heat, a great experience of inner heat, stability in it, and in this way he was rather proud and he sat on a high throne and he really made a big show of himself being a great Tummo practitioner. And he also had a couple of Western students. One day one of his Western students asked him, could you please maybe go outside and sit in the snow? I would so much like to take a picture of you meditating, Tummo, practicing the meditation of inner heat in the snow. And of course this Tibetan could not resist the opportunity, and out he went and set himself up in the snow in a proper posture. Now as it goes, at the time of the year the lighting is not all that great, and that student of his could not make a decent shot right at once. So he went around the Lama and took one shot. He said, this didn't really work out well. Let's try from this direction. Not good as well. Let me try again. And the Lama sat there and he started shaking. And his teeth started clattering. And then eventually he got rather impatient. He's like, but would you get on with it? Come on, how many more pictures do you have to take? Get on with it. And he was getting colder and colder. So the signs of his lack of realization were apparent very clearly.
Doji long jare keju sam sana te kabi goa gas and songji ge song ndo so no je so tang ji la jagar je pen che da na no be chi ba chen mo na ji de la chun de ra ja ni de ga wa ge de song ja chen mo yo ye sana chen mo yo ye ye na yang de ma long song ge ye yin mo che la pe sha da dang xie da la dong ni Roth just share that and don't get Mazina. There are around so then the better down Maduma, Tiga, and it dance on his Tiga go out on Tanga, young Taban to hop on my head.
Kamchaka continues to say, the Sutra and Tantra scriptures and the writings of scholars and siddhas of both India and Tibet have great blessings, but it is difficult for ordinary beings to understand them. So once again, there we have these teachings which are subdivided into the Sutra division and to the Tantra division, and lots of commentaries and sub-commentaries, practice manuals, etc. and so forth have been composed both by masters of India and also by masters of Tibet, great scholars and by great accomplished beings of both of these countries. Undoubtedly, all of these teachings and commentaries, etc., have great blessing, carry a lot of blessing and inspiration. But to fully comprehend them, to truly understand all of these teachings, a very long period of extensive study would be necessary. And that, it goes without saying, is for the likes of us, for us ordinary beings, very difficult to undergo. So therefore, to understand, to fully comprehend all of these teachings, the commentaries, the practice manuals that have been composed over centuries, will be very hard to comprehend for us rather more ordinary beings.
Yang tahu bagi na kasar cina siapa tahu, benda benda orang Sherab, mereka kabin tahu, and Nesula, and General, Sherab, Momo, Tatan, the Sona, and I give you some also, don't think that's all Sherab, that's all Sherab, and Image College, Tenga, Satika College, Tenga, then I get Sherab on Naran Johnny, Tatika Naran, Shebat, Hina, Benda Jana. Then she don't dig it, sending it, and then she don't give about Gumba, then the Yori. There are country and on then the Yori. Yet on her pocket, Gumba, then the Yori. Tama Basumba Ronzo, Jig, Gumba, then the Yori. Such a band target, Gumba, then the Yori. That then as a chamber in Hina, the Yancy many Google. Taking Yonsolena, group of children, Naronzo. Then Narcomuna, Samba, Ninja, Gum, Sineda, Gum, Sartina, Gum. That then sending the judge of Machina,
The text continues to say, they are necessary. So all of these teachings, the knowledge of these teachings is necessary for those who teach in monastic colleges. But such knowledge has little purpose for one-pointed practice. Now, if we were to teach all of this Dharma in one or the other of the great monastic universities, these institutions of great learning, then indeed it would be necessary for us to study all of these words, all of these teachings, the commentaries, the manuals that have been composed over centuries, etc., and so forth, in great detail. The great monastic universities, for instance, of Tibet, the very greatest and most famous ones were those of the monasteries of Ganden, Sherab, and Drepung, the great monasteries in the vicinity of Lhasa. But also nowadays in India, in Mysore, for instance, in South India, we have large monastic universities. There is in our own tradition, for instance, the Sri Nalanda Institute in Rumtek. Indeed, these great monastic universities of Sherab, Ganden and Drepung, they have been re-established in southern India, in the vicinity of Mysore. Then, of course, there's the Sri Nalanda Institute in Rumtek, which is the main monastic university of our own Karma-Kagyu tradition. Another such one at Siddha Rinpoche's seat in Sherabling. In the Nyingma tradition, they have the large Nyingma College also somewhere in southern India. There's the Sakya College near Rajpur. And there are many such monastic universities, larger and smaller ones, in which these academic studies are being continued also in India nowadays. Now, if we were to teach these words of these great masters of the past and the treatises, then indeed we would have to study all of these. If we were to explain to students exactly the words of the omniscient Longchenpa at this particular point have such and such a meaning, the words of Je Tsongkhapa at this particular point mean to say this and that, the words of the third Karmapa Ramjung Dorje are to be understood in such and such a way, and the words of the great Sakya Pandita have such and such a meaning in such and such a context, etc. and so forth, then of course it goes without saying that we would have to undergo all of these rather lengthy studies. However, if we're rather more interested to bring about the personal experience of Dharma by way of practice in this lifetime, if we were to practice one pointedly, as it says here in the text, then it is not really necessary to undergo such lengthy studies.
된다와 제나 나롱선 산나 간도 전부 용거리.
Kamachakma's text continues to say, the old lady's finger pointing will be of more benefit to the mind. So, needless to say, if we do not endeavor to undergo years and years of study and to become scholars, if we are rather more interested in bringing about experience through practice, then all of this studying is not necessary in any way whatsoever. We are rather more like small children which come into the world without having the knowledge of what things are being called. And this is likened to the old lady or the old mother who then takes the child by his hand and points out all the various things that it sees and tells the child their names. For instance, if one were to walk into a shrine room, there would be pillars, there would be flasks and all kinds of things, and the old lady or the old mother would then point out to the child, this is a pillar, this is a flask, this is a table, this is a chair, whatsoever, and so forth. In this way, this simple pointing out of what it is that one experiences is much more beneficial in order to bring about a clear understanding and a clear experience of what it is that we experience. And in this way, Karma Chagme is like that old lady or like that old mother of ours by way of pointing out to us that we have to bring about loving kindness and compassion. We have to continue to contemplate the nature of mind, etc. and so forth. So it points out the simple necessities to us which are necessary for us to understand, to bring about an experience of, and we do not have to go into a whole lot of academic study for that. So the questions about any of these points will